The morning after my wedding, my mother-in-law came. Not with flowers, but with a notary and a pen. I'm Jenny Harper, 28, a software engineer with a secret I've carried like a locked vault. I own a tech company worth $22 million, a legacy from my grandfather, Henry Harper. He once told me, "Silence is your weapon. Speak only when you know who's truly on your side." I never really understood it back then. But that morning, standing in my penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay, I began to. The city shimmered under the early light, calm and distant, while inside me something uneasy stirred. My wedding bouquet still scented the air with lavender, mixed with the faint trace of champagne from last night's celebration. David, my new husband, was still asleep, one arm draped across my waist, peaceful, or maybe pretending to be. I gently slipped out of bed, feeling the cold marble under my feet, trying to steady my breath. I hadn't told him about BlueWave Innovations, the company my grandfather built in the 80s, then quietly transferred to a trust under my name before he died. To everyone else, I was just an ordinary girl who married into wealth. No one knew I brought my own empire into this marriage. Then knock knock. A soft, deliberate sound echoed through the room. The housekeeper's voice followed, calm but urgent. "Mrs. Harper, Mrs. Margaret is waiting in the living room. She says it's important." My heart tightened. The day had barely begun, and yet I knew the real ceremony was only about to start. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. I learned early that silence protects more than words ever could. BlueWave Innovations wasn't just a company, it was my grandfather's heartbeat, his rebellion against a world that dismissed dreamers too soon. Henry Harper built it in the late 80s, back when personal computing was still a gamble. People called him foolish, said no one would ever need cloud storage or real-time collaboration. But he saw the future before anyone else did. He poured everything he had into that vision, his money, his health, even his family's affection. My father used to mock him at dinner. "Dad's still chasing fantasies in that dusty warehouse," he'd say, smirking over his wine glass. My mother would nod. He could have retired comfortably. Instead, he chose pride. I was 10 when I started sneaking into that warehouse, the so-called graveyard of ideas. But to me, it felt like entering a secret world. I'd watch my grandfather solder circuits, sketch codes, and whisper things like, "If you listen closely, machines tell stories too." He wasn't crazy. He was ahead of time. When BlueWave finally sold its first patent in 2007, an algorithm that later became a backbone for online data sharing, no one in my family celebrated. They had already written him off. But he didn't mind. He looked at me and said, "Jenny, when they laugh at you, let them. Just build quietly. The world will come knocking when it's ready." He was right. After he passed away, his lawyer, Samuel Reed, called me into his downtown office. I still remember the smell of old paper and leather-bound folders. Samuel's voice was steady as he handed me the trust documents. "He left BlueWave entirely to you. But there's a condition. You must remain anonymous until your 30th birthday, or until you decide to sell. Your name won't appear on any registry." I nodded, understanding exactly what my grandfather meant by silence. He wanted me to live free, untainted by greed or expectation. So I built my life around that secret. I studied computer science at Stanford under a scholarship no one knew I didn't need. I interned under my company's competitors just to understand what they lacked. And at 24, with Samuel's help, I quietly restructured BlueWave into an umbrella firm that funneled profits through multiple shells. To the world, I was just a programmer. To a few select board members, I was the ghost shareholder who never showed her face. Samuel was the only one who knew the full truth. He became like a guardian of my silence, reminding me to never let emotion speak before reason. Then came David, charming, magnetic, the kind of man who made the room feel smaller when he walked in. I told myself love was safe, that maybe silence could coexist with honesty. But as I would soon learn, even the strongest walls can't keep out family, especially the kind that smells money from a mile away. The morning sun spilled through the glass walls of our penthouse, casting soft gold across the marble floors. Everything still smelled faintly of roses and champagne, traces of a wedding that, until last night, felt like the beginning of something real. But then came the knock, and the shift in air that told me life was about to test the strength of my silence. Margaret Harper, my new mother-in-law, stood at the door in a tailored beige suit, her pearls gleaming like armor. Beside her was a notary, a man in his 50s, holding a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of polite detachment. "Good morning, Jenny," she said smoothly, stepping inside as if the space already belonged to her. "I hope you don't mind. This won't take long. Just a small formality for family trust matters." Her tone was honeyed, but her eyes were sharp, the kind that measured people, not moments. I offered a thin smile. "Of course. What kind of formality?" The notary opened the folder, revealing neatly stacked documents. I recognized the formatting instantly. I'd seen enough corporate papers to know what a transfer of rights looked like. The heading read, "Irrevocable Asset Authorization." So this was it. Not a welcome visit. Not a gesture of love. It was an ambush, an elegant, calculated trap disguised as tradition. Margaret continued, still pretending warmth. "It's standard, really. Just ensures all marital assets are consolidated under the Harper family estate. Protection, from outsiders." Outsiders. The word landed coldly between us. I felt a flicker of heat rise in my chest but kept my face unreadable. I took the document in hand, scanning the dense legal text. Every line whispered the same thing. "Sign this and everything that was yours becomes ours." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the distant hum of the city below. Then I looked up, meeting Margaret's expectant gaze. "I appreciate your concern," I said calmly, each word deliberate. "But I never sign anything without my attorney's review. I'll have Mr. Reed look over it first." The smile on her face froze, just a fraction but enough. Her fingers tightened slightly on her pearl necklace, the smallest tell of irritation. "Oh, that's really not necessary, dear," she tried again. "We're family now. Trust is the foundation of—" "Exactly," I interrupted softly. "Which is why I prefer clarity before trust." The notary shifted uncomfortably. Margaret inhaled through her nose, then exhaled slowly, regaining her composure. She gathered the documents back into the folder, her movements precise. "Of course, darling. Take all the time you need," she said, her smile returning, brittle this time. As she turned to leave, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, I stood still, watching her reflection disappear in the glass. Inside, my thoughts cut clean and cold. They thought I was naive. They didn't know I built empires in silence. The days following the wedding felt like walking through a beautifully decorated cage. The penthouse was still filled with white roses and crystal vases from the ceremony, but the air inside had changed, heavier, colder, almost rehearsed. Every gesture, every word from David and Margaret seemed wrapped in politeness, yet carried something sharp beneath. Margaret began visiting almost daily, her presence announced not by warmth but by the scent of her perfume, gardenia, and control. She never raised her voice, never acted overtly cruel. Her weapon was subtlety. "Oh, Jenny dear," she said one afternoon, standing in the living room while two house staff quietly carried out boxes. "I took the liberty of moving the wedding gifts to our family storage in Pacific Heights. You'll thank me later. Too much clutter attracts dust." Family storage. Meaning her storage. I wanted to ask why my friends' cards and my parents' gifts were now being organized somewhere else, but I already knew the answer. The next day, she handed me a set of car keys, dangling them between manicured fingers. A small token of welcome. A Tesla Model X. It's already registered under my name, of course, but you can drive it whenever you want. Her smile was perfectly kind. Her eyes said otherwise. David stood behind her, silent as always lately. Since the morning of that formality, he'd been distant, careful. When I asked about his mother's involvement in our finances, he deflected, gently but consistently. "She just wants to help, Jen. She's managed family assets for decades. Trust me, it's easier to let her handle things." Trust. That word again. It had begun to taste bitter. At dinners, Margaret would tell stories about how every woman in the Harper family learned to simplify their lives by trusting the family trust. "It's how we protect each other," she'd say with a small, knowing laugh. Then she'd look directly at me, as if daring me to argue. I didn't. I listened, nodded, smiled. I knew better than to fight noise with more noise. But I watched, and patterns began to form. Margaret's visits always coincided with David's absences. Their conversations hushed when I entered the room. The house staff, loyal to her, suddenly changed routines, certain deliveries redirected, my mail accidentally misplaced. The walls were beautiful, but they were listening. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked down the hall toward David's office, the sound of my own footsteps too loud in the silence. Voices came from inside, faint, conspiratorial. "She's not as easy as I thought," Margaret's voice murmured, low but distinct. "But she will sign. She just needs to feel safe first." My stomach turned cold. There was a pause, then David's quiet reply, the kind that cuts deeper because it sounds so calm. "Give me time, Mom. She trusts me." Trust. Again. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling the steady pulse of my heartbeat beneath my palm. The truth wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, sinking realization. They weren't just manipulating me, they were performing. Each act, each gesture, designed to make me doubt my instincts until I surrendered the one thing they wanted most: control. I returned to the bedroom, lying awake in the dark, the city lights flickering through the curtains like silent witnesses. For years I'd lived by my grandfather's words. Silence is your weapon. But that night I realized silence alone wasn't enough. If I kept quiet, they would win. If I spoke too soon, they would strike. Somewhere between those two edges, I had to find my own way to fight back. As the clock hit midnight, I turned to the window, watching the reflection of my own face against the glass. Calm, composed, unreadable. I decided not to be the pawn in their game. The next morning I woke up before dawn. David was still asleep beside me, his breathing slow and steady, too steady, almost rehearsed. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling that strange sense of calm that always came right before I made a difficult decision. I'd spent days watching them circle like predators in pearls and pressed shirts, pretending this was all about family unity. But now I knew better. They wanted access, not connection. And if silence was my weapon, information would be my shield. So I put on a simple sweater, tied my hair into a bun, and left the penthouse quietly. When David stirred, I whispered, "Just getting coffee," and closed the door behind me before he could answer. Outside, San Francisco was waking up. The air crisp, the streets faintly misty. I walked 2 blocks to a co-working space downtown, the one I'd used during my early startup years. The receptionist still recognized me, though I doubted she remembered the name attached to my old membership. Jennifer Blake, my alternate identity for BlueWave Business. Inside, surrounded by the soft hum of laptops and espresso machines, I logged into the BlueWave mainframe. The dashboard glowed with the same deep blue interface I had designed years ago. Numbers danced across the screen: user growth, investment returns, patent royalties, all rising. My company was thriving quietly, just as my grandfather intended. But then another window caught my eye. An alert from the joint marital account I shared with David. A recent withdrawal, $25,000. I frowned. I hadn't authorized it. I clicked through the digital trail, my pulse tightening as the recipient's name appeared. M Advisory Group, LLC. I didn't need to guess what the M stood for. I opened another tab and searched the company's registration details. Incorporated 3 weeks ago. Listed address: the same building as Margaret's family office. Worse, the transaction carried 2 digital signatures. David's and mine. Except, of course, I'd never signed it. The realization hit with the quiet violence of betrayal. They weren't waiting for me to hand over control. They were already constructing the path to take it. Slowly, legally, invisibly. In that moment, I remembered something my grandfather once said while we soldered circuits late into the night. The smartest thieves don't break locks. They build the doors themselves. That's what they were doing, building a door into my life, one signature, one smile, one formality at a time. I opened my encrypted folder labeled Project Guardian, the contingency plan I drafted years ago but never thought I'd need. It contained all the backups, ownership proofs, patent records, board communications, tied directly to me and timestamped with blockchain verification. The kind of evidence no signature could erase. Still, anger burned beneath my calm. Not because of the money, I could lose that and rebuild. It was the audacity, the entitlement, the way they assumed I'd never notice. I pulled out my journal, the one I'd kept since college, and wrote in steady, deliberate strokes. They didn't steal from my account. They stole from my trust. That sentence stayed on the page for a long time, staring back at me like a vow. By noon, I downloaded every document I needed and transferred key assets from BlueWave's liquid holdings into a new secure entity. If Margaret wanted to play games with paperwork, she would soon learn she wasn't the only one who understood the power of a signature. Before leaving, I drafted a single email to my lawyer, Samuel Reed, with one line in the subject: Initiate Phase 2. I walked out of the co-working space with my coffee in hand, the wind colder now, sharper, like truth itself. The board at BlueWave once joked that I was too quiet to be dangerous. They were wrong. I had just made my first move. By the third morning, the air inside the penthouse felt heavy, like a room that had stopped breathing. The silence between David and me was no longer peaceful. It was loaded, like a gun resting quietly on the table. When the doorbell rang, I already knew who it was. Margaret walked in as if she owned the place. Pearls gleaming, perfume expensive and overbearing. Behind her was the same notary from before, holding a brown leather folder. I noticed she didn't wait to be invited this time. "Good morning, Jenny," she said sweetly. "I brought something simple for you to sign. Just a precaution, to protect the penthouse for the family." I stared at her, then at the folder. My hands didn't move. "What kind of precaution?" I asked evenly. "Oh, nothing complicated," she replied, waving a manicured hand. "It's just a title adjustment for tax reasons. David and I would become co-owners, to make sure everything stays secure." My pulse quickened, but my face remained calm. "You mean," I said slowly, "you want me to transfer my house, that I bought with my inheritance, into your names?" David appeared at the top of the stairs, hair tousled, still in his robe. "Jenny," he sighed, rubbing his eyes as if this conversation was beneath him. "You're overthinking again. It's just paperwork. We're a team, remember?" Those 3 words, "we're a team," landed like a knife twisting through the illusion I'd been clinging to. No, I thought. We were never a team. I was the project and you were the strategist. I looked at him, really looked. The man I'd once trusted with my heart now stood comfortably between me and his mother, not defending me, but aligning with her. I realized then that the love I'd felt was real only on my side. I took the folder from the notary and flipped it open. Transfer of ownership. Joint management rights. Unlimited access. Every clause was a noose disguised as family unity. I closed it gently. "I'll have my lawyer review it," I said, smiling faintly. Margaret's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, dear. I just thought you'd appreciate transparency." "I do," I replied. "That's why I prefer legal clarity over emotional persuasion." David's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. When they finally left, the scent of her perfume lingered like smoke after a fire. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. Instead, I walked straight to my study, pulled out my phone, and called the only person who'd ever spoken to me without wanting something in return, Samuel Reed. Within an hour, I was in his downtown office, staring at the trust documents my grandfather had created. Samuel adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages carefully. "You did well not to sign anything," he said. "The trust has a defensive clause. Your grandfather was very cautious. It prevents any property or asset transfer without approval from the Board of Trustees." I nodded. "Can we activate it?" He smiled, the kind of quiet smile that means the answer is already yes. "We already have. I'll file the notice today." I leaned back, exhaling for the first time that day. "Thank you, Samuel. I think it's time they learned who they're dealing with." That night, I sat in front of my laptop, the city lights reflecting off the window like shards of truth. I opened a new banking tab, typed Ocean Shield LLC, and began the transfer. $3.5 million from my personal account into the new entity under my control. It wasn't about hiding money anymore. It was about reclaiming narrative. I closed my journal with a final note. They thought I was prey. I was setting the trap. Outside, the wind swept across the bay, rattling the glass like distant applause. Somewhere in the dark, Margaret was already planning her next move. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because now, I wasn't reacting, I was leading. By the time the storm truly broke, I was already 3 steps ahead. It was a gray Thursday morning when David left the penthouse early, dressed too sharply for someone claiming he had a quick meeting. He didn't kiss me goodbye this time. Just grabbed his leather briefcase and mumbled something about clarifying a few things with Mother. I watched from the window as his car disappeared into the fog. My phone buzzed, a message from Samuel Reed. It's time. I slipped into my coat and headed downtown, heart calm, step steady. For weeks, I'd been collecting quiet evidence. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every misleading clause Margaret had slipped into her family agreements. Now all of it had become ammunition, and today was the day to use it. At 9:30 a.m., I walked into the San Francisco County Courthouse. Samuel was already there, holding a stack of documents sealed with BlueWave's official insignia and my grandfather's trust certification. He nodded once. Ready? More than ever, I said. We filed a motion to freeze all joint assets, a move that would effectively paralyze any attempt to transfer, sell, or claim shared ownership without my consent. The moment the clerk stamped it received, I felt something deep inside me loosen. Not victory but relief. The kind that comes when the truth is finally backed by law. At the same time across town, David walked confidently into another courtroom, carrying a folder titled Petition for Marital Asset Control. Margaret sat beside him, immaculate as ever, pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights. He was smiling. He thought this was the final move. The clerk took the folder, flipped through the pages and frowned. Then she turned the monitor toward him. I'm sorry, Mr. Harper, she said matter-of-factly. You can't proceed with this filing. David blinked. Excuse me. She typed a few lines on her keyboard, then looked up again. Your wife, Mrs. Jenny Harper, filed a freeze order at 9:30 a.m. today. Everything is locked until further notice. The room went silent. Even Margaret's perfect posture faltered slightly. David's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around the briefcase handle. She did what? Filed earlier, the clerk repeated. By Mrs. Harper. It was a short sentence, but it hit like a verdict. While they stood frozen under the harsh courtroom lights, I was just a few blocks away, sitting in the glass boardroom of BlueWave Innovations. The city stretched below me, glass, water, movement, and for the first time, I saw it not as a battlefield, but as a kingdom I had quietly built. The board of trustees sat across the table, waiting. Samuel handed me the final document, a consolidated ownership transfer reaffirming my 85% stake in the company, including every subsidiary, patent, and intellectual property asset that my grandfather had structured into the trust. It wasn't just protection anymore. It was control. I took the pen, the same brand Margaret had used when she brought her own to my door, and signed in calm, deliberate strokes. Jenny Harper, sole managing owner, BlueWave Innovations LLC. The air in the room shifted. The men around the table nodded respectfully. Samuel smiled faintly. Congratulations, he said quietly. You've secured everything your grandfather intended for you. I looked out the window toward the bay, where fog rolled in slow, ghost-like waves. He didn't just build a company, I whispered. He built a map. And I finally learned how to read it. Meanwhile, David's world was collapsing in a courtroom he thought he controlled. His mother's hand rested on his shoulder, but even she couldn't mask the fear behind her painted calm. Every transaction they planned now required my authorization. Every account they touched was flagged. Every door they tried to open was now locked by me. Hours later, Samuel received a call from their attorney, an attempt to renegotiate family terms. He declined politely. When I returned home that evening, the penthouse felt different. Lighter. Quieter. There were no roses, no apologies, no explanations. Only absence, the kind that finally feels like peace. I poured a glass of wine and opened my journal. Under the date I wrote, he wanted my company. I kept my crown. I closed the book and stared out at the city lights reflecting in the glass. Tiny flickers of power and consequence. For years, people had mistaken my silence for submission. But silence, when used well, is not weakness. its patience sharpening its blade. And today the blade had finally struck. The courtroom fell into silence when the gavel struck. All assets and properties are to remain under the sole ownership of Mrs. Jenny Harper. The judge's voice echoed across the marble chamber, sharp and final. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply breathed, the kind of deep breath you take after years of holding one in. Across the room, David stood frozen beside his lawyer. His tailored suit looked suddenly too big for him, the confidence that once radiated from his posture gone. Margaret sat 2 seats behind, her pearl necklace trembling faintly with every shallow breath. For once she said nothing. The judge kept speaking, but his words faded into background noise. I was watching David, the same man who once whispered forever under candlelight, now staring at me with disbelief and quiet fury. When the session ended, he walked toward me, each step hesitant. "You didn't have to destroy everything," he said softly, voice cracked like glass. I looked at him, calm, distant, unshaken. "I didn't destroy it, David. I protected it." He had no reply. I turned and left, my heels clicking against the polished courthouse floor, each step sounding like a period at the end of a long sentence. Outside, the sky was pale blue, the air crisp with sea breeze from the bay. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing, microphones reaching. But I walked straight through them, silent. For once, silence wasn't my armor, it was my freedom. Weeks passed. The lawsuits ended, the noise faded. BlueWave was mine, completely, irrevocably. Yet the victory felt heavier than I imagined. Power without purpose is just another form of emptiness. So I made a choice. I turned BlueWave's headquarters, the building my grandfather had built from the ground up, into the BlueWave Innovation Hub. A sanctuary for women in tech, young inventors, and dreamers who'd been told they weren't enough. The lobby still carried my grandfather's bronze plaque. Below it, I added a new inscription. Innovation isn't about power. It's about resilience. The building came alive again, with laughter, meetings, coding marathons, and hope. It no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a legacy reborn. One rainy afternoon, while reviewing grant proposals at the cafe across the street, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jenny." I turned. David stood there, thinner, paler, a shadow of the man I once loved. "You won," he said quietly. "Was it worth it?" I studied him for a moment. There was no anger in me anymore, only clarity. "It wasn't about money," I said gently. "It was about clarity." He looked down, nodded slightly, and walked away, disappearing into the blur of traffic and gray rain. I sat there for a while, watching raindrops trace slow paths down the glass. The city lights shimmered across the wet streets, soft and alive. For the first time in years, silence felt warm, not lonely. I had lost love, yes, but I had found something far rarer, peace. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from understanding exactly who you are. And as I gazed at the skyline, I could almost hear my grandfather's voice again. Silence is a weapon, but rebirth is victory. The cemetery was quiet that morning, wrapped in a veil of mist that blurred the edges of everything, tombstones, trees, even time itself. I parked my car by the old oak and walked down the narrow path I used to take with Grandpa when I was little. The earth smelled of rain and pine, and every step felt both heavy and freeing. His gravestone stood near the top of the hill, overlooking the same San Francisco skyline that had once watched over us. The marble had aged slightly, softened by years of wind and salt air, but his name, Henry Harper, was still carved deep and proud. I knelt down, brushing a few dry leaves off the stone, and placed 2 things gently before it, my wedding ring and a sealed envelope. Inside the envelope was a copy of BlueWave's new charter, the document that officially transformed the company into a foundation for innovation and empowerment. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered, my voice trembling just slightly. I found myself again. The wind stirred as if in response, soft and kind. For a moment I closed my eyes and could almost hear his laughter, that low, knowing chuckle that used to fill his workshop when circuits sparked to life or when I, a curious little girl with messy hair, asked him how computers could think. He had built BlueWave not for fame or wealth, but for freedom, for the power to create, to think, to dream. Somewhere along the way I had forgotten that. The fight for ownership had nearly consumed me, until I realized it was never about the money or the name. It was about reclaiming my voice, my worth, my peace. A single white candle flickered beside the headstone, its flame small but defiant against the wind. I lit it in his memory, but as I watched it burn, I realized it wasn't just for him. It was for me, for the girl who once doubted her strength, for the woman who had learned that silence, when chosen, can be power, not fear. The horizon began to brighten as the morning fog lifted, revealing a golden hue over the city. It was the same city where everything had started. The deception, the manipulation, the battles, and yet, standing there, I felt none of it. Only calm. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and felt the smooth edges of a new BlueWave keycard. On its back, engraved in silver, were the words I had chosen for the company's rebirth. Build not to control, but to inspire. I smiled through the soft chill of the morning and whispered one last time. You were right, Grandpa. Silence is a weapon, but freedom. Freedom is everything. As I turned to leave, the candle's flame danced brighter, refusing to go out. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood. They wanted my company, but I saved something far more valuable, me. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but for every woman who learned that silence can be power. For every heart that chose dignity over revenge, and peace over chaos. Because sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Thank you for listening, and remember, true strength begins the moment you stop needing to be understood.